Welcome to Getting Ghosted, an Intuitive Soul Collective podcast. I'm your host, Allie Horner. Welcome back to the Intuitive Soul Collective podcast. I'm your host, Allie, and I am so excited because I've got one of my buddies who is on the other side. And as you know, I am a clear conduit channel and psychic medium. When I clear conduit channel, for those of you guys who haven't heard it before, it's a little less like where you're in conversation with someone on the other side. So there isn't going to be as much of me stopping and listening and then having to repeat, though I may do that here and there. Clear conduit channeling is much more like a lucid channeling. It's almost like where they can kind of meld into your energy a little bit more and speak through you. So it's kind of like you just kind of, the way I describe it is it feels like I'm kind of cracking open the top of my head a little bit more, and I'm just speaking and going with the flow rather than putting a stop on it and trying to hear with my clairaudience. So you kind of switch to this claircognizant ability in a sense rather than using your clairaudience during this one. For those of you guys who are interested in that. It does take a lot of faith to just get in there and just really let it go and trust whatever is coming through. I've noticed when I do this too, that my mind will kind of move aside and I'll be sitting there talking and letting things come through stream of consciousness from whatever being it is that wants to channel through me. And if you've ever seen me channel before, you notice this, but my mind will kind of be observing it and commenting on it. So, and saying like I'll be channeling things that I didn't even know that I knew. And so I'll be over on the side going, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. Or, oh, that's neat. Like, so it's kind of fun. It's difficult to describe, but, it's kind of, it's something where the more that you do it, or if you do it yourself, you'll understand exactly what I mean. So, I do have one of my buddies on the other side. I call him E-Man. His name is Eric, and he loves to come through and chit chat and channel. He's doing a little bow for us right now. If you've been on my TikTok lives or seen any of my previous channelings that were on Facebook back in the day, you are aware of him and you probably already know him. Or know of him, but he's over here and he's going to come through and talk about sexual awakenings and spiritual awakenings. He says, he goes, y'all, they go hand in hand, and he's putting his hands together in kind of a symbiotic format. And he said, I am still going to stop and listen a little here and there if you hear pauses. So keep that in mind. He's saying, so a lot of you guys, you close off your senses so much when you're awake. And he said, and I mean like awake, and he said, overstimulated, alive, like you're living your life. You got to go to school. You got to go to work. You got to take care of the kids. You got to get fed. You have to cook your meal. You have to drive back and forth. And he said, you got to go to the gym. You got to do this, clean your apartment. And he said, you're so overtasked, overwhelmed, overstimulated that you shove all of these spiritual abilities and these sensations down. And he's showing with his hands, like pressing, like pushing them down, trying to force it down. He said, but over time, that pressure just erupts in a sudden like onset and flow of emotions. And he said, but it's not just emotion, it's physical sensation. So it's not just feeling, it's sensing. And he said, it's not just emotional feeling, it's sensory feeling, like body sensations. And he said, so that's what happened during Allie's sexual awakening is with her spiritual awakening coming hand in hand, that when she began to meditate more and tune in with her higher consciousness, he's showing in my mind's eye, the brain changing and suddenly lighting up in all sorts of areas that it wasn't lighting up before I had started to meditate and tune in and talk to guides. And he's saying, your flow, your auric field, it almost like kind of comes out and through you. And he said, that's really what that Kundalini awakening truly is. He said that's the best way to describe it, is it's like an energy flow up through your spinal column. And he's saying, but it really is more of an esoteric process than that. He said, but the physiology of that is, he said, it's really cool. He's like, you guys should study up on it. It's really neat. I mean, he said they do have documentation of what's happening in the brain and body during it. And he said it's like lights on a Christmas tree, like a Christmas tree just being plugged in and sparkling. And he said it's so rad to watch as a soul. And he's saying as he jokingly said, as a disembodied form. Woo! And he said, I'm just kidding. And he's like, I'm just joshing ya. But he is showing me, he's like, so here's like your physical form. And he said, when you are closed off to your psychic senses, and he said your sexual ability as well to reach heights, it gets kind of, he said, I wouldn't say totally turned off, because people can still have the big O, right? But they don't quite have it in the same way as they would during a spiritual awakening. It's much more, he said, like, he said a spiritual awakening, where it's like a Kundalini thing, it's much more serene. And he said it kind of like blasts through you. It's very different than having like just a kind of a basic O from, getting together with your little friends. He's mashing his hands together jokingly. He said, but the reason that so many people kind of like, have that cork in the bottle in the first place where they can't tap into all of that sexual energy and charge, he said it's really like a creative energy in and of itself. He said, your mind is really strong. And many of you have been conditioned to feel that feeling and that energy is wrong. And he's holding his hand against his heart. And that's his sign for like compassion, having compassion. And he puts his hand over his heart. And he said, this is a lot of, he said, this is cultural conditioning, and it keeps you turned off from these sensations and these bodily sensations that are totally natural and normal. And he said, he's playing the song, You Can Fly, You Can Fly, You Can Fly from Peter Pan. And he said, yeah, because he said, think about where that ability to fly came from, the happy thoughts. And he said, but it's not just thinking them, it's feeling them. He said, so many of you guys are turned off from the core of who you are that you can't even possibly hope to have sexual fulfillment in its full entirety because you're so conditioned not to believe in yourselves, not to trust it, not to awaken to it. You're conditioned to go about your day, be busy, blah, 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 make the bed, yada, yada, tend to the garden, tend to the kids, feed the chickens. And he's like, go to work, slave away. And he's saying, and then you guys can feel that there's something inside of you that wants to play, that wants to feel lit up, that wants to feel alive. And you don't know what to do with it because there's so much shame. And he said, even for those of you guys who aren't like Christian or Catholic and don't think you've been privy to that type of conditioning, he goes, yeah, you have. He goes, it's really, really pervasive and it gets stuck in your field. Right. And he goes, so you do things like you numb out, you scroll on your phone, and you overeat, and you do things like overexercise sometimes, or maybe you starve yourselves because you feel bad. And he just keeps saying there's so many ways we keep that life force energy tap turned off. Like he said, you really, really try. And he's showing someone turning off the tap and the water keeps trying to come through. So they're holding the tap closed, like they're like really struggling with it. Like, no, stay in there. No, you can't come out. And he said, but over the course of your life, what happens is that energy, because it's a beautiful life force energy, but you keep so much, he said, like shame and anger. And he says, but it's mostly shame. He said, it's almost like it creates this like, he said, like he's showing it like in the gut, and in the reproductive organs, and he's showing it up and through the diaphragm and coming out through the rest of the body, and like someone hunching their shoulders, and it's in their shoulders and their jaw. He said it turns inward on itself. And he said, but that creative energy, it's got to have a way to come out. It's got to have a way to express itself. He said, that's your birthright. It's most natural for you. He said, but for a lot of people, so for Allie, when she had that Kundalini awakening, it wasn't of a sexual nature at all. It had nothing to do with her sex organs. He's like, it was like God itself pouring through her. And he said, it's like a moment of like, it's called a satori, or an enlightenment experience. And he said, they don't last like always forever, but it's like a moment of existential bliss. And he said, that's what your soul feels all the time, but on a massive scale. You're still only feeling a fraction of it, even though it's like, holy cow, this can make you go cuckoo. Like for Cocoa Puffs, he's like, it can make you feel a little loco, right? I was like, yeah, it made me feel like I was going to lose my mind for a second. And he said, yeah, because it's completely changing your autonomic nervous system and your brain. And he's showing again the lights on the Christmas tree. And he said, again, there's a really clear scientific physiological component that's totally natural to this. But he said, again, you guys live in so much shame and anger and distraction and hurt and pain. And he said, and most of all, fear of who you are and what you came for and how good you can feel. You guys are afraid to feel so good. So you keep trying to turn the tap off and you try to shove it down. And then when it does come out, it comes out in this like wild way. Right. And he goes, right, Allie? And he's like bumping me with his elbow, like, eh? I was like, yeah, it was interesting. And he said, and then he's telling me, he said, now what happened afterward? What happened afterward? Like he wants me to continue. And I'm like, well, he's showing me the changes to my body, which I don't think I covered in the previous podcast, but when I did have this happen, yeah, my body, I actually found that weight dropped off like almost overnight. And not that I have like a ton of excess, on me, but I found that suddenly I was like toned and I was suddenly like pretty svelte and I didn't have to do anything differently. I was still eating normally. I was still, I was just going for walks. I wasn't doing any extreme sort of exercise. I had a pretty little kiddo at the time. So there wasn't anything extreme or crazy happening. I wasn't doing Pilates. I wasn't doing anything. And he just said, yeah, exactly. And he was like, your skin and your eyes. And I went, and I just thought to myself, oh yeah, I used to get compliments on my skin all the time. Even though I would break out a little bit here and there, people would always say, what are you doing to your skin? And I was like, I don't do anything. At the time, I literally just washed my face with water. I washed my face with tap water and then I put tea tree oil on it and calendula. No joke. And Eric is over here going, yeah, exactly, because you didn't have to. He said it was just natural for you to exist in this space. And what people were seeing was your inner radiance, that you had finally taken the cork out of the bottle. You had turned the tap on and said, all right, I cannot keep this energy in here anymore. And he said, what happened to your brain? Like he's pointing to his mind. He's like, tell him what happened to your brain. And at first I had to think like, what is he talking about? And I went, oh my God. Yeah, I was full of ideas. My intuition skyrocketed. I felt crystal clear. He's nodding his head and clapping. He's like, yep, here we go. I had so many ideas and I actually I started channeling. That's when that really started to happen several years back. I just literally could not I couldn't think about anything else. I just wanted to create all the time. I felt like I was totally lit up and tuned in and turned on all at once. And I would come up with all these cool ideas. And I started a membership. And I just wanted to channel all day. And I had all these epiphanies about life and how life works and all these in the universe and all these wonderful things. And I just wanted to talk to my friends all day about all these ideas I had. And these are like my human friends, not my spiritual buddies on the other side, by the way. And we would have these long conversations about everything under the sun and how the universe works and the guides and what they're saying. And I went to full creative mode, and I remember my business took off massively because I was like, I'm going to make a course on this. And I had one called Infinitely Wise Woman that I've run a couple times and we'll probably run again at some point, but it was all about how to tune in with your guides and how to tap into your inner wisdom and use it to inform your life. And I started a mastermind and hosted retreats and was constantly playing with my website. I was just chronically in this, I couldn't stop channeling. I wanted to write blog posts. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to record. I wanted to do all these different things. It was just totally lit up all the time. And he's like, yep. And he's just like nodding his head and clapping again. He said, that's it. That's what happens when you take the cork out. It's not always about sex or sexual energy. It's about life. Your life force energy finally coming through you. And he said, people do awesome things when they finally say, I'm not ashamed to feel good. I'm not ashamed to be me. And he said, again, I'm not just talking about the sexual energy part, though that comes with it. He's saying when people are doing kind of deviant stuff or forcing sex on people, he said, there's nothing spiritual about that. That is not life force energy. That's someone who is trying to repress what how they feel, and they're living in shame and fear, and they want to control other people. So they're using their energy incorrectly. And he said, spirit never says that that's okay. And he was like, we do not create things like that, and we can't control it, but we will help you guys try to make miracles out of it afterward, or try to find your way after things like that happen to you. But he is showing when you're really unapologetic and unashamed of, and you're in your creative mode, he's like, your sexual energy, it just kind of comes with it. He's like, your mind's open, you're tuned in, you feel really good. So there's no reason for you to feel like you have to stop what you're doing. You start to feel like, oh man, I can live life. I can do my whole thing. And so that's what he's showing me. He just said, yes, these awakenings go hand in hand. And he said, because the brain and the body are both online all together. And he said, so a lot of women, they find that they're finally in tune with their body and their physical form again. They're not ashamed of their body. They're not afraid of their body. They're not afraid of these emotions. He's showing little girls who were maybe being a little bit, I don't know, just attacked in school or conditioned. Little girls aren't supposed to feel this, and they're not supposed to have attraction, and they're not supposed to have, longings or feelings or be creative. They're supposed to blah, blah, blah. He's like, yeah, exactly. Little girls should be seen and not heard. They're supposed to be good little girls, nice little girls, right? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, and many boys and men got the same conditioning. He goes, and that's why there's a lot of deviant behavior where they get so overwhelmed by it, they want to go take it. And he said for women, they turn inward mostly. They turn in on themselves. And he said, and they end up like, being of service to everyone else but themselves because they're so turned off from their own life force energy. And he was like, he keeps saying, but that doesn't mean you can't take care of others or can't love them or care about them. He said, actually, the more you're at home with your own sexual charge, your own creative energy, your own life force, the better you can actually love and take care of others. So he's saying from Spirit's perspective, it's actually a beautiful, wonderful thing for you guys to know who you are and be very connected to that energy and that charge. And he said, now again, like Allie talked about, what happened for her is she started to realize like, maybe I'm like just into the person's aura. I'm into who they are intellectually. I'm into who they are as a human. I don't really mind so much what they look like or what sex organs they have or how they identify. And he said, that's exactly what happens because you start to realize, well, like, he said, because you kind of take that cork out of the bottle, you can finally get things flowing, right? And he goes, so a lot of your conditioning begins to melt away. And he said, not everyone realizes that they're gay. Not everyone is like, oh, I'm bisexual, but it's not super uncommon to see that during a spiritual awakening because a lot of people start to really trust and listen to their inner wisdom again. And maybe these things that they kind of shut down or kind of repressed a little bit, or maybe on some soul, like some like really deep ego level, like felt like I can't be that way. And so they just shut that part of themselves away. That part of themselves comes back online and they welcome it in with open arms because they're no longer living in so much shame. And he keeps showing shame is something that happens naturally for emotions. But he said the ick part is when you let it sit in your system and fester. And he just said, so he's saying there's some people who say like feel and deal and heal, right? And he keeps saying, it's okay to feel that emotion, but don't let it don't let it get the best of you. Don't let it take over. And so he's saying, but it's not uncommon for a lot of women and a lot of men to just kind of go, well, I kind of just love people now. I kind of just love life now. And he said, the beautiful thing is that when you're really in that energy, you're not trying to take anything from anyone. You're not looking at other people like you serve a purpose for me and you got to be this type of partner and I need you and blah, blah, blah. You actually lose a lot of your codependency because you're more fulfilled from within. You're into your creative energy. You feel connected to your soul. So you're not looking for anything from anyone that they can't or aren't willing to give. You kind of just go, hey, I'm fulfilled on my own. I don't need you to be anything or do anything for me. So, hey, if we're ever both on the same page, great. But if we're not, no problem. I don't need that from you. And he said, this is really scary to a lot of humans to suddenly realize, I don't know that I need to have a partner. I don't know that I need to have this because I've been so conditioned to look for love through partnership and sexual relationship and even heteronormative sexual relationship. If I let go of that, then who am I? And what am I existing for? He said, so many of you guys, like that is who you think you came here to be only, or like, even if you think, oh, I get to be a career woman, or I get to have a great thing that I've made of myself in the world. Otherwise, you still look for that as the crux of success in especially Western America or Western world. And so he keeps saying, but once you start to have this spiritual awakening and you start to question or shift all that and you're more happier and content in and of yourselves, you're not looking for things from other people that they can't give. And that affects your sexuality because you suddenly take off all that need and all that codependency and all that ego part of it, like where you attach meaning to it and attach identity to that stuff. You finally go, well, if it doesn't mean anything about me, then why can't I just exist in and of myself and be happy? And for that matter, if I date anyone, why can't I just date who I really enjoy spending time with? He said it's like a mind fuck for a lot of people. But many people go, God, I haven't felt this good in my entire life as when I finally came home to all this. So he just keeps showing how natural it is. And he said, so from Spirit's perspective, this is as natural as it comes. This is when you step into more naturalness. But it starts from going, I want to hear my intuition more. I think I want to talk to my spirit guides. He said it starts in little ways, or, oh man, I'm going to meditate because I feel like I just want to feel better. I just want to feel better. I want some relief. He said it starts with these little things and then it ends up cascading into these bigger things. And so he said, from Spirit's perspective, we don't care who you love. We could care less. And he said, God doesn't condemn homosexuality, doesn't condemn any sort of relationship like that. He said, but the one thing that on the other side that we do recognize is a big no is non-consensual. And he said like aggression, control, non-consensual sex, manipulation, sex that is about controlling, hurting, taking. And he's like, that is not what that was meant to be used for. And he's like that, he said on Spirit's end, we spend a lot of time trying to help people heal from going through those experiences. And so he said like the consent part, regardless of your sexual orientation, the consent part is paramount. And he said, there is no love in something where you're trying to just take it from someone, or control or manipulate them. He said, so from Spirit's perspective, though, we could care less about your sexual orientation. We know that this is part of the process and part of the deal. And he said, this is part of the homecoming, but he's pointing to home. When he said homecoming, he pointed inward at his heart, like home to your heart, home to your soul, your true self. He said the seat of the soul, and he's pointing to his heart. And he said, so the more that you come home to yourself, the less you got to really like worry about all of this, like, what's my purpose and who am I and how am I supposed to be? And oh my God, I think I might not be as straight as I thought. And he's like, yeah, I mean, you kind of just feel at home in yourself. So it doesn't really matter as much how you identify. You don't really get caught up in too much of it. You just kind of go, cool, great. And you live your life, right? And he said, because you're comfortable with who you are. And you just go, yeah, I mean, I'm getting to know myself. Great. I'm having a good time on earth. Cool. I'm not hurting anyone while I'm at it. Even better. And he said, so from Spirit's perspective, this is the naturalness from which you will return. And he said, now keep in mind from our perspective, to really be open-minded and open-hearted means to be open-minded and open-hearted to yourself first. And that's really a huge spiritual construct in and of itself. And he said, like, love thyself. Well, to love thyself, you have to really know yourself. And you have to really, he's talking about parts work in therapy. And he's showing letting all the parts of you come to the table finally, and not having shame or trying to shut off any of them, and just saying, it's okay. It's okay. These are all parts of me, and that's all right. These are all parts of me that have been here all along for one reason or another, and I'm all right with that. Let's all come and have a chat, And then he said, the more integrated you are with all parts of yourself, the more you can get closer to loving exactly who you are, when you are, and where you are, and that's where your sexual orientation and identity can really truly come from. And so he said, from Spirit's perspective, we're you're getting rounds of applause up here when you guys really come home to yourselves, regardless of what the sexual orientation is. They're like, he just keeps saying, he's like, all of us guides, and he's sweeping his arm across, and I can see just a massive crowd of thousands and thousands of spiritual beings who are glowing and waving and cheering. He said, we could care less what your orientation is. We just care that you love and take care of yourselves, and that you love and take care of others. He said, that is the type of stuff when you get to the other side, when it's your time to croak. He said, when it's time for you to come home, like come back, when it's time for you to come home, and it's time for you to really reflect on your life and your life review, you're going to be really proud of yourself for being true to you and for loving yourself, which allows you to really love and take care of others, regardless of your sexual orientation. However, if you really try to hold back who you are, that's something that you will find love and compassion for on the other side as well. So if you don't feel like you can authentically live as you, or there's a real threat, like you might lose your life or whatever it is, just know that your soul will hold full love and compassion for you, and you won't have to worry about feeling shame in the afterlife experience. You will, however, look back and say, man, would have been great if I would have been able to do that in this lifetime. He said, but some souls have different paths and different trade-offs that they're making. He said, we can get into that in another episode. So I was looking at him like, hey, do you got anything else? And he's like, no, as we are. So, or as you were. So I appreciate you guys listening today. That was kind of a fun one. Let me know if you want any other guides to come through. I will have them come through and talk on different perspectives, and especially because they all, they articulate things in different way, and they share in different ways. They speak in different ways. They generally have the same perspectives, but the way they share and how they articulate things can always be really fun to hear. So I'm happy to bring people back through. If you're more interested in this topic, go ahead to my website. It's intuitivesoulcollective.com. And fill out the form on the podcast page and let me know, what are you interested in? And is this an interesting topic? Is there anything you want to share? Any more questions you want to ask? And I can always pull my guides back in or channel on it myself and see what comes through. Thank you so much, guys. Well, that's it for today's episode. I wanted to mention really quickly, I also have my Patreon membership opening now. The link should be in the show notes and in my bio on TikTok. It is a really fun community with different levels of membership. So if you want just a taste and behind the scenes episodes, extra little Q&As from the Patreon, or from the podcast, there's a Patreon group for that. And there are also upper levels that are more for people who want to learn more about intuition, want to have intuitive games to practice, and even a group for people who are a little more experienced and want to practice more channeling and learn how to tune in, tap in, and turn on their abilities on a higher level with their guides so that they can bring their bigger vision to life. So there's something in there for everyone, no matter how experienced you are with intuition, mediumship, psychic ability. Like I said, there are 2 Patreon groups that are more for just learning and consuming information, sharing stories, talking about synchronicities, finding some fun friends to chit chat with. And I'll be putting some behind the scenes energy updates, channeled information, stuff like that in those. And then the higher level groups are more for people who are wanting to practice their intuition, develop, learn, and who are looking for people who want to do the same things. So if you have questions about those, feel free to reach out. My website is also linked in the show notes. And thank you guys so much for listening in on these episodes. There's also a link to my website where you can submit your stories to be shared in the listener submission episodes, where I will be including different podcast listeners who've submitted stories about ghostly events, visitations from loved ones, all sorts of messages they've gotten, intuitions they've had that helped them, synchronicities, manifestations, all of that fun stuff. So feel free to submit your stories there. And then if you have questions, or if you have certain things that you want to hear about on the podcast or have questions about, you can also pop those in at the link in the show notes. Thank you so much, guys.